So today we want to give an overview of our FY25 Coastal Resilience Grant Program. My name is Patricia Bowie. I'm a Coastal Resilience Grant Specialist at CZM. And I also want to introduce India Mackinson, our Coastal Resilience Grant Specialist, who will be explaining our grant program overview this morning.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm India Mackinson, the new Coastal Resilience Grant Specialist. I'll be helping Tricia administer the grant program and also be helping the RCs with technical assistance on projects. All right, next slide, Tricia. Thank you. So first, we're going to go through the basic information about the RFR this year. We're going to also spotlight some key project themes that we're looking out for. We'll also be going over tips to make the applications more competitive. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a general question and answer period. And then from there, we're going to offer breakout rooms with our regional coordinators and other members of the CZM StormSmart team. You can ask more specific questions and talk about project ideas and those as well. Next slide, please.
And just on the breakout room discussion, we are not going to come back together as a larger group after that session is over. So once you're finished with asking questions or having discussion on project ideas, you're free to just jump off of the webinar and go about your day.
All right, so we're first going to go over our main goals for the Coastal Resilience Grant Program. So first, we'd like projects to address current coastal flooding and shoreline erosion issues. We want the projects to adapt to future climate conditions, such as sea level rise and increased precipitation. We're looking to protect public facilities and infrastructure assets, providing broad public benefits and access to our natural resources, and supporting the adaptation of environmental justice communities. Next slide, please. So these are the numbers from our 10 years of the grant, which started in 2014. Since then, we've awarded $46 million with $17 million in local match over 57 coastal communities. You can explore all these past projects with the CZM Grant Viewer. If you just Google that phrase, it should come up in the search results. You can explore projects by year, project type, community. So I definitely encourage you to go explore that information, get some project ideas, and see what kinds of things we funded in the past. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about what's new for fiscal year 25. This information is still tentative and pending approval from EEA, but this is what you should plan on until the RFR is released. That will have the final numbers. But overall, there's not much change from last year's RFR with a couple of exceptions. First, we're going to have approximately $4 million available to award this year. Our project cap will remain at $2 million, which is the same as last year. For the past couple of years, we've had no match requirement, but we are going to bring it back to some degree this year. First, federally recognized and state acknowledged tribes will not have a match requirement at all. And that also includes projects that directly serve or involve environmental justice neighborhoods. And applications really need to demonstrate that involvement throughout their application to get that waiver. So next, we are going to require a 25% match for construction and shoreline restoration. So that would include things like retrofitting infrastructure and dune nourishment, for example. That really covers any kind of major construction project. And finally, we will be encouraging 25% match for all other projects, such as public outreach and planning, but the match is not required. We do encourage it. It will make your application more competitive if you provide as much as you can, up to that 25%. Also, a new requirement this year will be that project planning proposals will need to submit the Resilient Mass Climate Resilience Design Standards tool, which is also something required with the MVP grants. We've also slightly adjusted the evaluation criteria, adding 5 points to the project management and partnerships category. Here, we're really looking for meaningful partnerships across sectors, whether that's with nonprofits or businesses to some degree, and the community at large, which can be demonstrated with really strong letters of support and partner engagement throughout your project. We can go over more later in the presentation. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
Oh, wait, I think we skipped one. All right, well, we're missing a slide on the who's eligible, but I can just talk about that. So these funds are eligible to our coastal municipalities and nonprofits with publicly accessible land in the coastal zone, as well as federally acknowledged, federally recognized and state acknowledged tribes. And we're really looking for 5 different project types. And as I go over these project types in the following slides, keep in mind that your project can fall into more than just one category. I would say that some of the stronger applications do touch on multiple of these categories. So the first category would be the detailed risk and vulnerability assessments. And these really establish the baseline for communities and show them where they're vulnerable and helps them decide how to invest in climate adaptation. This program would kind of build off the MVP assessments that most towns have already done. Next slide, please. So next is public education outreach. This really helps communities as a whole better understand the risks ahead of them and empowers them with this knowledge to make their community more resilient. We funded projects such as middle school curriculums, interactive websites, and physical exhibits to increase engagement and local adaptation. Next slide, please. Next, we have proactive planning, which is more of a change in policy and implementing processes that help the community holistically prepare for climate change, such as stricter building codes or planning phase manage retreat. For example, in Hull this year, we're doing a study to decide whether or not to move their vulnerable public works facilities. Next slide, please. And now we also have redesign and retrofits. This is more construction focused, such as elevating electrical equipment out of harm's way from flooding, and moving beach parking lots back from the dunes, as you've pictured here. And for this, we really also want you to consider nature-based alternatives. Next slide, please. And finally, we have shoreline restoration, which is also construction focused. We can do shoreline restoration for marsh and beach. So living shorelines and beach nourishment would be eligible for this. What we want to see with shoreline restoration projects is that we're enhancing the natural system with vegetation and sediment to curb erosion and flooding impacts. Next slide, please. So these are the typical phases of projects that we fund. We usually fund only 1 or 2 of these phases at a time. So per grant application, due to the time constraint of the grant, which is only about 9 months from when the contract is typically awarded. We've had multiple projects that we funded through, successive grant rounds, starting from planning phase and moving all the way through construction. So you can come to us with an early project and, we might be able to work with you to fund multiple rounds. But if you have not done those phases with us and you want to come in for a construction project, that's totally fine. Just make sure you submit your documentation that you've done the previous phases and have permitting all lined up. And also, while the permitting and construction phases are typically done in separate grant cycles, we usually have applications just focused on permitting or just focused on construction. We do see successful applicants come in with the planning and design phases, those first 2 phases combined into 1 year. It's really all about what is a reasonable timeline to get the project done by the end of the contract. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go over the timeline for this year. We're planning to release the RFR in April. And until then, you're free to talk with us as much as you would like about your application and get feedback. You can reach out to your RCs directly. You can also talk to Trisha and I. We're happy to help. But once the RFR is released, we can only take formal written questions. So the 2 weeks following the RFR release, please email us to that Coastal Resilience email listed in the middle right there with your written questions. Then we will compile those and answer them and post those responses to our website. Once that period closes, you have about 6 weeks from the RFR to send us your applications. Please email those applications again to that Coastal Resilience email. We'll then go into the review process, and the awards will be announced in the August-September timeframe. And really soon following that is when we'll start project scoping and executing those contracts. So the project start date will be in September and October, and that will be the official date will be the signature from EEA on your contract that we send you. And it's important to note that anything you do towards the grant before that date will not be eligible for reimbursement. We can talk about that one as well. So the project end date will be the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th, 2025. So that's a really hard deadline. We can't extend it at all or fund things that happen after that date. And we do have possibility for 2-year contracts. In that case, the final end date would be June 30th, 2026. But it's important to note in your application that you really need to delineate between the 2 years. The funds allocated between one fiscal year to the next does not automatically roll over. You really need to work as hard as you can to extend those funds that you plan for the first year in that first year. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Trisha to go over evaluation criteria.
Thanks, India. As India mentioned, our grant program is competitive. We evaluate all of the applications on the list of criteria that's shown on your screen. We did list the point value after each criteria just to give you an idea of where the points are allocated. If you do have experience with applying to the grant program, you will see that the first criteria that we had in previous years for coastal hazards management has been built into the second criteria, which was for climate adaptation. So we increased or bundled those points into 10 points for you to describe your current vulnerability and future vulnerability and adaptation. We do also have a section where we ask you to describe the need for assistance, including technical need, financial need, and the capacity of the applicant and partners. This is also the section where we look to see how projects may engage with environmental justice populations. So we do have points reserved for those projects that directly involve or serve environmental justice neighborhoods. The detailed project description is 15 points. So this is kind of, where the main narrative of your project is. What we look for here is a rationale of the project approach, how it addresses the climate impacts that you're trying to reduce. And we also want to hear about your methodology and who's working on the project for each task, along with a detailed description of deliverables that your project will be developing. The public benefit and interest is very important to our grant program. We look for projects that provide broad public benefits and increase the resilience of sites, of neighborhoods and of regions. So it's really important to identify the ownership of the project. So whether it's taking place on a town or city-owned property or a nonprofit property, that's very important to be clear about that, and how the project will improve the resilience at the site or at a larger scale. The transferability, what we mean by this is that we look for the project approach or methods or deliverables to be transferable, meaning other communities that are experiencing similar impacts can use those products. It helps us, be able to make those grant dollars go a little bit further, especially because it is competitive and we can't fund everybody to do the same work. We at least want to try to make sure that communities can develop products that can help communities experiencing similar issues be able to address those impacts. The timeline and budget, these kind of go hand in hand. We look for a realistic timeline. So we want you to be able to complete the project within the grant period, which, as India indicated, is not quite a whole fiscal year. It does get down to about 9 months or so once contracting is finished. So we look to see that the work proposed can fit within that time frame. And if you are proposing a 2-year timeline, we want to be able to see that you do have that break off between the fiscal years so that you can commit to completing the work you propose in the first fiscal year by that June 30th deadline. The other interim dates for completing milestones in the project, we realize those are kind of a best estimate at this point when you're applying, but we do, want to make sure that, you can be meeting those as the project progresses in advance of that June 30th deadline. We look for cost-effective budgets. We ask that you provide a breakdown of the grant funding and match funding in a template that we provide to you, which I will show in a minute. Project management and partners. This is where we increased from previous years. We had 10 points. We increased this to 15. We do realize that it does, take a lot of work to reach out to project partners early on and get their support and have them document what their role and participation in the project will be through those letters of support. So we do carefully look at those, and we are really interested in funding regional projects or projects that involve really good partnerships. And overall project quality is just, the taking the whole application into account, the public benefits that it provides, and the team that you've selected, and how it will address the impacts that you describe. Again, the breakdown by task and fiscal year, we do want to see that for the project description, for the timeline, and the budget if you're proposing 2 years. This is just an example of the scope of work that we provide in Excel format that we ask applicants to fill out and submit with their applications. this just kind of shows you, we look for a simple, project task description. We want to see an outline of the tangible deliverables that you plan to submit to, document what work was done. The deliverable due date and the date that you expect to submit reimbursement requests to CZM are identified on here. And then how much funding you're allocating for each task. And then you can see in the yellow rows how we do have this broken out by fiscal year. So we do need you to do your best to try to stick to those costs that you identify by fiscal year. Like India said, funding doesn't automatically roll into the next fiscal year. If you're, if the project was delayed, there has to be discussion with CZM and approval to be able to make some scope modifications like that. And finally, we provide some resources on our website, and these will also be in the RFR to help applicants prepare applications. I first want to point people to our Storm Smart Coast website, where you can find more information on our grant program, and we do link to our new CZM grant viewer from there. We also provide fact sheets on various topics that may be helpful depending on the project you have in mind. And we also have an updated sea level rise and coastal flooding viewer that includes the mapping outputs from the MCFRM, or Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, for 2030, 2050, and 2070. We also link to training videos that were given last year, which are really helpful if you need a refresher or background on the modeling. I will point to some EJ resources a little bit later in the presentation, but I also want to highlight that we have some resources for municipal staff looking to engage with environmental justice communities. Resilient Mass, it has a wealth of information. If you're not familiar with this website, I encourage you to take a look at everything available. The downscaled climate data and projections are available at resilient.mass.gov. The Climate Resilience Design Standards tool, which we are now requiring that projects planning to come in for a planning level phase of a project, we need to complete that and provide the report. This provides guidance for what the risk level might be that you would want to prepare for, and a link to the 2023 Resilient Mass Plan, which that used to be what we called the State Hazard Mitigation and Climate Adaptation Plan, is now rolled into the Resilient Mass Plan. I also want to just mention EEA's Office of Climate Science. Staff are available to answer questions that you might have on the climate data and projections on Resilient Mass. So I did provide their email. If you do have a question, you can reach out to the Office of Climate Science for clarification on the climate data and projections. And finally, the Massachusetts MyCoast. This provides reports and photos of storm impacts that were reported by staff and volunteers that go out after storms and report observations in your municipality. So feel free to browse those reports for your location. Those can also be used to help describe current vulnerability in your application. I'm going to get into a few of the themes that we talked about a little bit earlier today, and that we mention a lot in the RFR. So regional projects and partnerships. What we mean by this would be communities working together at a larger scale within a system. So, for example, an embayment or a littoral cell where coastal processes are acting as a system. The example I have on the left-hand side of the screen is Marshfield and Duxbury. So these are projects where communities come together. They have a cohesive project. These aren't separate projects. They're really tied together. And the municipalities really have shared resiliency goals. These projects often require coordination over multiple project phases. And while that can be a little bit more work involved than just working as one community, I do want to highlight a lot of the benefits of working together as a region. These do have the potential to have a bigger impact on the ground because you can cover a larger area working together. It helps to increase the transferability and the public benefits for a larger area. And communities have come together to do joint public meetings, which I think not only saves time and resources and money from doing separate meetings, you're also providing that benefit to the public of providing, consistent messaging and information because it is essentially you're working on the same project. And municipalities can leverage just a broader local expertise and pull resources together to implement a larger project. Here are just a few examples of regional projects that we've funded in the past. They're highlighted on the map. So just to give you kind of an idea of the breadth of work that communities can come together on. We've worked with the Great Marsh communities on the North Shore on mapping vulnerability and expanding community engagement on coastal impacts and sea level rise. We've worked with Chelsea and Everett in the planning stages of a project to address a flood pathway at their border at Island End River, which is shared by the two communities. I also just mentioned Marshfield and Duxbury. We've been working with them over multiple phases to design and permit, and they are currently in implementation of a beach nourishment project that benefits the littoral system that they share. They also did a lot of robust public outreach in that project. The Outer Cape has been working on developing a framework for intermunicipal shoreline management. And on Martha's Vineyard, they worked with the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies on mapping low-lying areas and flood pathways in those communities. Support for our adaptation of environmental justice communities. Again, this is a focus of not only CZM, but of our administration. And these projects that we look for are projects that really involve and directly benefit EJ residents. So as I mentioned earlier in the evaluation criteria, we do have points set aside for projects that provide these direct benefits. Whereas, projects that just take place in the community that have an EJ population. So there is a difference, and we do want to recognize and acknowledge the projects that actually directly serve EJ populations. We also look for letters of support from EJ representatives and how they are involved in the project or what their role is. And some project strengths that we've seen of projects that have an EJ focus, they really engage the affected community members. They provide interpretation and translation services in outreach materials and in presentations that they give. And they really have dedicated staff facilitating interactive workshops to help maximize community participation. These are the resources I alluded to earlier. The image on the right is of the Environmental Justice Viewer. And the documents that are listed are also in our RFR and on our website, which help municipal staff if you're looking to engage in equitable and community-driven resilience planning. So these provide some action steps and creative methods for having those conversations in environmental justice communities that could be effective. And finally, one of our priority areas is really looking to try to reduce the vulnerability of public facilities and infrastructure. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of projects that are getting to that goal in various different types of projects. House of Seven Gables, they are looking at some building floodproofing in the near term. And I think it's really interesting that they're also evaluating for longer term adaptation needs and considering the relocation of the seawardmost buildings on their property. From a redesign and retrofit perspective, sometimes there's critical facilities and infrastructure that is just may not be able to move. So we have worked with Hall on looking at a lot of alternatives to protect this facility, which serves the whole population of Hall, to design a flood protection strategy. And they did a great job of trying to consider some more greener alternatives with vegetated buffers where they could and where space permitted, and really tie into the building and landscape through other protection methods. And where natural shorelines do exist, we do encourage applicants to look at nature-based methods to really restore that buffer that protects landward development. And in Chilmark, they did recently completed a dune restoration project along Menentia Public Beach to help protect the parking lot and landward areas. Finally, I want to end with some of our tips for helping develop competitive applications. One of our favorite tips is the first one. We really encourage applicants to write your application assuming the review committee doesn't have any background on your project. Even though we might be a little familiar with it, the review committee changes each year, and it is an interagency committee, so it's not just made up of staff from CZM. We bring in help from other agencies to get other perspectives on the project. So it is very possible that not everybody on the review committee already knows about your project. So really be sure to explain the rationale and the approach and why and how the project is going to achieve the goals that you intend for it to do. Also, sometimes when you're writing the narrative, be sure you translate what the tasks that are in the narrative are also found in the scope and budget. So, for example, if you talk about some community engagement efforts in the narrative. Be sure that those are called out in the scope of work, and that you are dedicating some funding to, as shown in the budget spreadsheet. We also recommend developing really discrete tasks and deliverables by fiscal year. This just helps provide a greater level of detail, and should the need arise to need to modify the scope down the road, having those discrete tasks makes it a lot easier to modify the deliverables if you're running into some delays. We talked about the realistic timeline and budget. When you're developing the timeline, we do encourage you to think about how long it may take for your local contracting processes. So sometimes it can take up to 3 months if you are going through like a public bidding process to bring consultants on board. Just be aware of that and build that into your schedule. We also recommend you allocate some time to allow for your project team to be able to review deliverables as they're developed. This is especially important before public meetings, where you may need to have a meeting with your project team and CZM to walk through presentations, develop FAQ sheets or other materials that you plan to distribute to the public. We also suggest holding regular project team meetings throughout the life of your grant project, including CZM and other local and state agencies as necessary or as relevant in your project. This really helps keep the schedule on track, and we want to be involved, and we want to help flag any issues that might come up, and this just keeps the project going, so you can help get to that June 30th deadline on time. Also anticipate time to secure match funds if a town vote is needed. For example, a lot of times towns will hold that meeting in the spring or in the fall. We do not need the funds appropriated by the time you submit the applications, but we do need to know that they are in the process of being approved. Coordinate with local departments and ensure they're in support. This is getting back to project management and obtaining letters of support, reaching out to partners early and getting their letters of support that really describe what their role is in the project. And again, we also require that all of the projects provide meaningful and accessible opportunities for public engagement. This kind of wraps up the presentation part for the webinar today. I do want to just mention again, we are available to provide feedback on proposals until the RFR is released, which we're anticipating sometime this April. And I just want to recognize our regional coordinators and the work that they do to help these projects be as successful as they are. The technical assistance really I see is a huge value to the grant projects. We have a wealth of experience working on these types of projects. So we want to work with you, especially on projects involving the planning and coastal processes we can be involved in. We have experience with reviewing grant deliverables and broader project review. we can help you coordinate with various agencies, and we can tap into regional networks that we're a part of, and helping with the public outreach components of your project. So feel free to send an email to our regional coordinator and our grant team, and we can help you discuss your proposal if you're thinking about submitting this year. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we will open it up for some Q&A. And I can also see if any of our regional coordinators or if Julia would like to add anything before we do get into any questions. Okay, and yes, we will share these slides after the webinar. We will post the recording and a PDF of the slideshow on our website.
Tricia, this is Sam. I just wanted to say, many of you may be thinking about projects even a year down the line. And even if you're not ready now, we're always available to talk about any projects and try and get them prepared. Obviously, this is for this FYI year. But we, open communication and asking the RCs, we're always willing to listen to any idea.
Thanks, Sam. Any other questions? Okay. All right, well, I'm going to stop recording and I'm going to open it up breakout rooms. You will have the option of choosing which room you can go into. So again, we have North Shore, Boston Harbor, the Cape and Islands, South Coast, and South Shore. So feel free to join whichever room matches your location. And let's see, recording.